Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If men were angels, James Madison told us in the Federalist Papers, no government would be necessary, and if angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. And so as I look at this agency, which lacks all the traditional measures for constitutional accountability, I'm reminded by that insight. The Founding Fathers understood human nature, and they understood that people in positions of power will eventually, at some point, abuse that power. That's just inherent in the nature of man. And so they built a government to have checks and balances. And as I look at this Consumer Financial Protection Agency, I'm wowed by the amount of power that's been invested in this. Very limited executive accountability. CFPB director is essentially the financial czar of the country. No budget oversight by Congress, and I know we're trying to change that in this bill, but Madison said that's the most effectual check that we have in Congress is the power of the purse. And there's this huge amount of deference in terms of what judicial review is allowed to be done. The courts are instructed to defer to the CFPB. The problem with that is that there are a lot of novel concepts in this bill. Terms are introduced that don't necessarily have a definition in other regulatory history, and the CFPB is basically going to be given carte blanche to go forward on that. And when asked about some of these terms, the CFPB director said, well, you kind of figure it out when you see it, and it's a puzzle that we're putting together. Well, that's not acceptable, and I think the American people need to have recourse to the courts. So what my amendment does is it reinstitutes judicial review. It removes this excessive deference that's been granted to the CFPB. I hear these reports about all this data that's being collected on American citizens, credit card transactions, debit card transactions. Millions of these things are being done. Are we just supposed to say that the people should have no recourse in case that is abused? We're just supposed to trust the CFPB in terms of how they use that data? The bottom line is you have an agency that's combining legislative power, executive power, and judicial power. That's contrary to our constitutional structure and contrary to the separation of powers doctrine. And I don't think most Americans have confidence that some far distant bureau should just be left to their own devices and that somehow they'll be able to make all these decisions better for individual Americans than they can make for themselves. And so I urge the adoption of my amendment, Mr. Speaker, and I'll retain whatever time I have and yield back.
Gentleman reserves